Thank you for joining us today as we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. Day here in Salt Lake City, Utah in the year 2022, when instead of being able to be together and come together and march to the University of Utah and serve at the Utah Food Bank as we do every year before, we're here in a panel virtually trying to keep safe COVID protocols and still be able to continue the conversation and advance the movement that Dr. King so eloquently, peacefully, and powerfully brought to the United States and brings still to Salt Lake City, Utah as the capital city, and where we celebrated just in the last couple of weeks the most diverse city council that we have ever had in our city's history. And over the last 18 months or so have progressed more reforms relative to the inequities that have existed since the foundation of this city was laid. We are going to continue to work to establish greater equity across all systems that Salt Lake City government can reach, and do so by working hand in hand, side by side with our neighbors and those people that we serve. So today you have the privilege of hearing from an incredible panel of people who walk the walk and talk the talk, who bring that work to you as the residents of Salt Lake City through their own service. We have a wonderful moderator today, MJ Powell, who is a leader in and of himself. And I will turn the time over to MJ to introduce our panelists today.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Salt Lake City. My name is MJ Powell. I am the legislative intern for Salt Lake City. It's a privilege to moderate today's panelist discussion. I would sincerely like to thank all the speakers for honoring the continuation of Dr. King's work by being here today and contributing to a meaningful dialogue that affirms our local leaders' shared commitment towards working towards a truly inclusive and equitable society for future generations to come. I'm pleased to welcome Salt Lake City Mayor Erin Mendenhall, Salt Lake City Councilwoman and Chair Amy Fowler, Councilman Alejandro Poi, Commissioners Esther Stoll and Jason Wessel from the Human Rights Commission, as well as our community's very own civil rights leader, Reverend France Davis, who is also a commissioner for the Racial Equity and Policing Commission. Before moving into question number one, I would like to ask City Councilwoman Fowler if she'd be willing to start.
My pleasure.
Welcome, City Councilwoman.
Thank you, MJ.
If Dr. King were here today, what would he think of the state of affairs in the United States in terms of homelessness and continued racial disparities?
So you're going to start me out with the hard one, right?
Yes, ma'am.
I can't begin to imagine what somebody of such caliber and poise and intelligence would think of where we're at today, but and try to put myself in Dr. Martin Luther King's shoes. But what I can comment on is that I think he would be where many of us are, and that is in a state of both despair, but with hope. It is hard to see our communities struggling with homelessness. And I know that as elected officials, as people that sit on the commission and boards, that we are doing everything possible to help our communities that are experiencing homelessness. And it is even harder to see that we continue, if I may say, hundreds of years later, with the racial disparities and inequities in this country that we have. But I do know and I do see that what we have right here today, as Coletta has said, is exactly what I believe Dr. Martin Luther King envisioned. And people from everywhere, every color, every identifying characteristic that you can think of, sitting here and having a conversation and making sure that we are the people moving forward and empowering our communities, and making sure that as policymakers, we're the ones saying, wait a minute, this isn't right. How do we fix this? How do we make sure that we're not just sugarcoating something, but that we are delving in and having the hard discussions and having those internal debates with ourselves of how we can be better, and making sure that as elected officials and policymakers, we're the ones that are coming out with better policies that are actually saying and addressing that we have racial disparities and that we have inequities throughout our city. For too long, what we have seen in this country is that it gets swept under the rug. What we've seen in our own city is that it gets swept under the rug. And what I think that we are seeing right now, and why I say there's these moments of despair, but these great moments of hope, is that we have everyone sitting here having this discussion saying no more. We're not going to sweep it under the rug. We're going to call it out. We're going to say it like it is, and we're going to make the change. And I hope that Dr. Martin Luther King would be proud of us.
Thank you so much, City Councilwoman. Reverend France Davis and Commissioner Davis, how do you see commissions such as the Human Rights Commission and Racial Equity and Policing Commission as continuations of Dr. King's legacy?
Thank you, MJ, for the question. Remember that the theme for this year's celebration is becoming a beloved or the beloved community. And part of our problem in the society currently is that we are mean and mean-spirited. We are angry and hateful in many of our ways and attitudes. And it is the organizations like the Human Rights Commission and the Racial and Ethnic Policing Commission that help us to realize that changes need to be made in terms of training, in terms of policy, and in terms of actually the practice that goes on before us. So these organizations are basically every day taking a look at the issues that are before us. Many of those issues were there when Dr. King was alive. And as we take a look at those issues, we decide what is the best approach that we as Salt Lake City can do to meet the goals of a beloved community.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis. And I would also like to thank you for your time as a civil rights activist, not only in the South, but here locally. The impact here in the communities is very felt, so thank you.
Thank you. I actually met Dr. King and walked and talked with him on the march from Selma to Montgomery, and found that he was a delightful person. And I've tried to make that available to us here in this community as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Question number 3, Council Member Alejandro Poy. How have you seen Dr. King's legacy and speeches weaponized against the very people King tried to serve and represent? As elected officials and commissioners, how do you combat these in your everyday lives?
Oh, I want to start by saying that, yes, I have seen it a lot. And especially, you know, just last year and the year before with the marches and the streets and people saying, oh, talking about law and order, but forgetting a little piece that we need to address, which is justice. And justice is key when we're talking about law and order. And, you know, we can just not talk about law and order if we don't get to the bottom of it, which is addressing those injustices in our systems and in our history, and acknowledging that we have failed in some cases. So I think that is an important step. And I keep hearing sometimes people talking about the riots and how those are not producing what some people wanted to produce or liking those. But then on the other hand, people being okay with riots that storm into our national Congress. And that is a conflict that I cannot answer. I think that we really need to talk about justice when we're talking about these issues. And Dr. King's legacy and influence in my life, even having grown in a different country, is very powerful. I read a lot about him. As a kid, I loved to watch movies, and I got a lot of my history from movies or documentaries, and those were very powerful to me because fight was hard, never ended. He wasn't afraid of tension, and we need to be okay with that. And especially in Utah, sometimes we are afraid of tension, but tension is helpful. Being uncomfortable about a conversation, it may be the start of something good, and we shouldn't be afraid of it. And I think that Councilmember Fowler said this, sweeping under the rug these injustices. When we talk about the issues that we have in our systems and our history, we really need to talk about it, even though they may be uncomfortable conversations to have. But we really need to readdress them and say, what did we do wrong here, and how can we change the system to make it fair? And we should never forget about talking about equity. This week I went to the county council to tell them that they should uphold the mask mandate. I had a comment directed to me about why those people in my community are not showing up. But we really need to remember that, many in my community have 2 or 3 jobs, and they have to, they have a voice. But they cannot necessarily show up sometimes to a meeting at 3 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon. But they have a voice, and we need to be thinking about them. And we shouldn't stop addressing their issues. We shouldn't stop talking about them. The fight is not, have won. It hasn't stopped. The tension is fine. And we also need to tell people in our community that their voice is needed and is welcomed. And institutions have to do everything in our power to reach out to them and say, we need your voice. We want your voice. Please tell us what you think. And that is something that is very important to me.
Could I take just a minute and add, MJ, to what the commissioners just said, that during Martin Luther King's actual life, he was in tension against people like Malcolm X. And it is that tension which allowed then the work of equality and fairness to be achieved as much as it was by Dr. King. Dr. King would never have been able to do what he did if Malcolm had not been waiting. There are 2 speeches kind of represent that. Martin Luther King talked about using civil disobedience and nonviolence. Malcolm talked about by any means necessary. And those 2 speeches kind of illustrate the tension that the commissioner was talking about.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move to question number 5 with Commissioners Wessel, followed by Commissioner Stoll. How is Salt Lake City working to move forward on the fundamental human rights laid out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? In what ways can the city improve?
Thank you, MJ. I'm going to take the first part of this question, and I don't want to go too deep into the weeds, but to do kind of just a quick crash course on the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. Essentially, it was adopted rather quickly and almost unanimously very early in the existence of the United Nations. The convention was chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt, and it fell into quickly. It fell into about 2 different categories, where you had on one side you had economic, social, and cultural rights in one set of issues. So essentially ideas or ideals. And then the other were civil and political rights or legal rights. So these got divided into these 2 different camps, and people found it was a lot easier to focus on the civil and the political rights issues because you could pass laws that would pertain to that. That's where we saw things like the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act. That's what, to bring this back to Dr. King, That's a lot of what he focused on in that period between 1960 and 1964. The part that we celebrate the most with the adoption of things like the Civil Rights Act. But we saw later in his career, he started to focus more on that first group of more intangible ideals like the economic, social, and cultural rights. Saw him taking on issues of poverty, especially addressed in, I believe it was, yes, his final book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, and demonstrated in several of his speeches, like in 1967, the 3 evils of society, where he specifically laid out poverty. I believe, poverty as being the #1 issue that we're facing, along with race. Stumbling over my own words here. Give me a second to collect myself. So poverty, economic justice, and militarism were the things he was taking on in 67 and 68, as started moving into a more globalist view of trying to alleviate suffering around the world. We saw the just prior to his death, he was organizing the Poor People's Campaign that was specifically focused on economic justice. So that's kind of the crash course on the differences of kinds of human rights that we're talking about here. And I believe that because that group of the political and civil rights, which are under attack right now, is more happening on the federal level, what we're doing as a city is more in line with that first set, the economic justice and the more intangibles. So guess I'll hand it off to Commissioner Stoll to talk about how we're specifically addressing that on the Human Rights Commission and with Salt Lake City with some actual concrete efforts in that direction.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Commissioner Wessel. I purposely had Commissioner Wessel go first because he has a wealth of information and knowledge that's always applicable for our commission. And I don't know that many of you know, but he is a historian. So I always appreciate his background knowledge on all that we're doing. And I think what you just mentioned, Commissioner Wessel, was very important for us to talk about in terms of this platform today. In addressing the second part of the question, which I'll just read back to you, it's asking in what ways can the city improve? Well, I'd like to just point out that the city, Salt Lake City, in establishing the city ordinance in October 2005 was the first start in this process, and setting up the Human Rights Commission. And the purpose, as many of you know, is to advise and help the city government to check and eliminate all discriminatory practices on the grounds of age, ancestry, color, disability, gender, national origin, marital status, medical condition, physical limitation, race, religion, or sexual orientation, because all these things adversely affect the general welfare of the city and the vitality of its neighborhood. In the past several years, COVID has definitely been a huge part of our lives and has in a lot of ways changed the course of what we have been able to do, especially as a commission. And we're just gearing up again to start focusing on the things that are important in assisting the city in making sure that these things are being addressed. I came up with 3 things so far. I know there's a lot, but the 3 things that come to mind is 1, that the city listen and change and sometimes update the ordinances and policies to serve the people in the communities today. I think a lot of the policies and ordinances have been, it was set up to serve the residents in the past. Things have changed and a lot of those things need to be addressed and kind of looked into and see how it can help the residents now. Secondly, I believe in being honest, and not just with myself, but we need to be honest. We need to be honest with the reality that we face, which can look very differently for everyone. Pardon me for a second, let me come. Thank you. Reality can look very different for everyone. However, if we're all at the table equally, reality can then be closer to what we all see. So in doing so, the policies and ordinances can adequately serve the entire community. I think sometimes what we have on the table right now are policies that serve one group over the other. And a lot of that needs to change if we are to really walk in the way that Dr. Martin Luther King walked, in wanting everyone to walk together as brothers and sisters. The third item that I have as a way that the city could do more is to continue to have the conversations we're having, like for instance, this conversation. It's a beautiful part of Salt Lake. And as a transplant to Salt Lake, or to Utah in general, I would say that Salt Lake is leading the rest of Utah in terms of representation. We are ahead, but we are not there yet. Continued work, application, and mind focus on serving others should be the center of these conversations. So I am really proud of Salt Lake for what it's doing, for all that, for everyone, just in general, for being here, for having this conversation, for taking out the time to sit together and talk about the past and how that impact is affecting us today and what we're doing today to continue that work. So on that note, there's a lot Salt Lake can definitely do, but I will say that Salt Lake is definitely working on it. And it makes me happy to see that and happy to be a part of it. So thank you.
If I could add one bit just really quickly. It asks, what are we doing currently at the city and at the Human Rights Commission? In 2016, we managed to get CEDAW, which is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, adopted as a resolution by the city. And we are putting the final touches on a proposal to get CEDAW adopted as an ordinance at the city, which will be a concrete step forward in on one of those social and cultural rights issues. A way for us as Salt Lake City to say that we're moving forward and leading on this particular issue.
Thank you so much, HRC commissioners. Next question is going to be open to all the panelists. Do you feel as though Dr. King's dream has been realized? If not, do you think it will be in our lifetimes? Why or why not?
If I can start by answering that question to some degree. First of all, I think that we have, that his dream has been realized in a number of ways. First of all, the laws on the books, Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and other acts on the book are there to protect all of the citizens of our country. Secondly, we've had elected officials, including Mr. Obama and others, like Mayor Mendenhall, who have been elected to office, and city council people like Councilman Amy Fowler, who've been elected to office to represent an aspect of our community that was otherwise not represented. And of course, we have Sandra Hollins in the state legislature. So I think in those ways, we have reached his goal, but there are still many, many other ways that we have not. And I'll leave those for others.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'd like to open the floor up to anyone else that would also like to answer that question.
I'll take that. I agree with Commissioner and Pastor Davis. It was good to see you definitely today. I think we've come a long ways, but I think to sit back and relax and say that the work is done is detrimental to us now and the future. I think there's always work to do. So that work the work was already started and we're just continuing it. And I think even generations to come will still continue it, but we should definitely not sit back and relax ever. As though that it's been realized, so we're good to go. We can check off that box and go our way. We still need to be a part of that conversation, a part of that, I don't want to say struggle, but just a part of the, we have to do our part and be present and have the desire to affect the changes that we need to see in our communities, from the ground level all the way to the federal level. So I would definitely say that the work, many aspects of it has been realized, but we still have a lot more to do and a lot more to go.
I would,
Thanks.
MJ, if I can jump in, I of course agree with Commissioner Stoll and Pastor Davis. And I think in some ways, I don't know that the work ever will stop, because there's always somebody that we should be fighting for. There's always somebody that, and that's unfortunate. It shouldn't be that way, right? But if we stop fighting for the greater good of all of people, then, to Commissioner Stoll's response to that, then we're just sitting back and like, we're good, we're done. And that's not who we are as passionate and compassionate humans. And I don't think that that is what Dr. King, as a passionate and compassionate human, would ever want us to see, is to just say, the fight's over. There's always something and somebody that we can stand up for. And that may just be your neighbor. It might be, for whatever reason, that we just want to make sure we're there for people and fighting the good fight together. But with that, I do think that we as a city have made changes, and we have looked in the mirror and said, what can we do better and how can we do it? But that means there's still a lot more mirror to look at. And I'm ready to sit and stare at that reflection and say, what else can I do? And how, as an elected official, can I look at these policies, and how can I count on the HRC and the REP Commission to make sure that in what seem like little ways. One of the things, when we first started the REP Commission, one of the things that Chief Brown and I talked about before the commission was what barriers just in the application itself to be a police officer are we putting in there that we don't even know about, we don't even realize, maybe because it is just so ingrained in the culture. But we have these barriers there that make it so people of color or people of diverse backgrounds or people from the LGBTQ community don't want to apply, because the question itself is a barrier. And looking at from that perspective, and we get the opportunity to do that throughout all of our city policies. So I know I'm kind of going off the question itself a little bit right now, but just how important this conversation is, that we kind of like upturn every rock and say, what's under there and how can we fix it? Does it need to be fixed? If so, let's fix it. And that needs to happen throughout our entire city. And I think that in all reality, in the last 4 years that I've had the great opportunity of being on the council, I've seen so much work and so much progress, and I'm so grateful. And this next council with so many different perspectives, and the perspectives of our HRC commission, our REP commission, and our young people, and getting people involved, there's just so many more rocks we get to overturn and say, wait a minute, that's been buried under there. Let's fix that. Let's take that out, talk about it, and fix it. And so I think we are realizing it, but I don't think we ever get to stop. And that's okay. It's an opportunity for us.
Thank you, City Councilwoman. Everyone who added to that point made a great observance of the point of where we are in terms of community action, and I think the extent to where we need to go. And as a young person, it was very motivating for me to hear. So thank you all. My final question is going to be open to everyone. While we acknowledge Dr. King and celebrate his legacy every January, what can we as a community do year-round to keep the dream alive? Commissioner Wessel, may I start with you?
So I don't know if we're the correct audience for a question like that, because I mean, we're all working and involved on a daily basis. I mean, that's the kind of question that we would throw at somebody that is hopefully watching this. And that's kind of to go back to the previous question, the points that Pastor Davis brought up and that the council member Fowler brought up is that the beauty of the language that Dr. King used, you were able to apply it to the aspirational and the inspirational, the I have a dream or the I've been to the mountaintop, where it's always this ongoing process of revolution, evolution, rebirth, of finding new goals and new ways to apply yourself. And then also to Pastor Davis's point that there are plenty of tangible goals that were met, many benchmarks that are met, and one step at a time of ways to achieve making the world a better place. So I think that's a question for each individual person to say, well, what can I do? What place am I in to help either better this cause or to achieve some more of those goals? Right. I just saw a message saying that we have time for 2 more comments, so I'll just cut it off there and use brevity for a change.
Thank you, Councilman, or pardon me, Commissioner. Thank you.
And I would like to add something very quick, if that's okay.
Yes, sir, Councilman. Thank you.
I mean, just, what can we do as a community to keep the dream alive? I just think about not giving up. And, sometimes, especially, in my side of town, some people they just think that nothing can be done about whatever issue it is. And that hurts. The fight is still there. Just don't give up, because that's when we lose everything. So keep on fighting, get people involved. I think that is very important.
In essence, I would say that we're all in the boat together, and unless we all work together to fulfill the dream of the beloved community, we'll never get there.
And I think we have time for one more comment if someone would like to add an additional perspective.
I think all that has been said has been beautiful and just exactly what we needed to hear today. The fight goes on, the beauty goes on, and I don't want to ruin the ending because it's been absolutely beautiful, and just to hear the different perspective and it makes me feel good to realize that we're all in this together, and also that we all have this perspective of we have to keep working at it. The work doesn't stop. We have to keep going. And I was mentioning this to Commissioner Wessel before. I feel that I'm a beneficiary of Dr. Martin Luther King. My life and my kids and what we do here today is as a result of that fight that he worked on. So I'm grateful to be standing here, sitting here with all of you, and being a part of his legacy and how he really wanted us to be. So thank you all for the role that you all play in your different capacities. And I hope that you know that I personally appreciate all your time and efforts to make our community better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Thank you to all of our panelists today for being a part of this great lively discussion. As a young person who's passionate about aspects of racial equality and creating sustainable change here in my own community, it's important for me to be able to look at my elders and to remind myself that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. So thank you all individually, and collectively as a community, I hope we can move forward into 2022 with love and hope in our minds and hearts as we operate forward. Before closing and passing back to the mayor, though, I think it would only be appropriate for me to release a quote from Dr. King himself. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Thank you all. Back to you, Mayor Mendenhall.
Thank you, MJ, and thank you to every one of our panelists for living the incredibly relevant teachings today of Dr. King that are still as compelling as they were the days that he spoke them, and where we have the space and the tenacity and the mandate as a community to do this work. It's not something, as everyone has said, that's ever done. It's actually a directive of how our democracy should work in perpetuity. And I appreciate that in the time that we have been working together, you have helped Salt Lake City become a part of GARE, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. You've helped to create and are perpetuating the Commission on Racial Equity and Policing. The citywide equity master plan is almost complete. We have a language access policy that's in the works and coming together. We're doing environmental justice across our city in areas that we have waited too long for something else to improve before we finally start doing environmental justice work. We're waiting no more. And Martin Luther King holiday is not a passive holiday, the way President's Day is, and so many other days we recognize as Americans. This is a call to service. It is a day of action. It's a day that we invite each other to be a part of building and becoming that beloved community together. It's such a beautiful mantra for us today. So thank you all. Thank you to all of you who are listening. And we invite you, if I may speak for all of us, to be a part of this ongoing work, to join us in the things that our panelists have talked about today, and in the ways that we continue to expand as a city to find and uncover the equity that we must. This is the work of government. It is what public services is and should be about. And I am honored to be your mayor and be able to be a part of this work with you today. Please come to community, help us build it. We wish you well. Thank you.